even when you are in a season where you aren't getting as tempted as much and everything's pretty much going right in your life, you still need to be preparing for when God is going to test you. It's just like in school. If you're going to school or if you're getting tested somewhere, you're going to have to prepare beforehand. And that's what we must do in this walk with Christ. Because I heard this saying that you're either in a storm, about to go into a storm, or just coming out of a storm. And so there's always room to prepare in this walk with Christ. And so that's why you always need to be ready. The word tells us over and over that we are in a spiritual battle. And so if we get comfortable, if we get lackadaisical while reading your word, we get lackadaisical in spending time with God, then of course the enemy is going to creep in and attack you when you are not ready. So that's why it's important that you prepare even when you aren't going through the storms. And that's actually when you should be preparing the most, so that when the war is coming, when the war is here, when the trials and tribulation season is here, you'll be prepared. So that's why in this video, I'll be talking about the 5 ways that you can actually prepare so that you'll be ready for the spiritual battle and the test that God is going to give to you when the season comes. The first way to pray for the spiritual battle that's coming up is to pray. The season where you aren't getting tempted, the season where everything is going right in your life, is the season you should be praying for the most. You should be praying for the future trials and tribulations so that you are ready when the time comes. You should be gaining your strength, gaining your wisdom so that you'll be able to maneuver through the storms. And honestly, this is one of the best times to even go on an isolation period when everything is good, because the more you prepare when trials and tribulations are not there, then the easier it will be when the trials and tribulations come. That's why before Jesus went to ministry, he went to the desert. That's why Paul went to the desert. It's because they had to prepare for that spiritual battle that was coming up. And so they went to the wilderness. They went to somewhere alone to go spend time with God, distance themselves from everybody else so they can find themselves. They can prepare their mind for where they're going. And that's exactly what we must do. We must prepare before the battle even starts so that we'll be prepared to win the battle. And the second way to win those spiritual battles is to build good habits in that season. So if everything's going good and you just feel like life is good, you're not going through too many trials and tribulations, and the trials and tribulations are going easy, that's when you should start building those good habits. So when things get hard, you already have those habits in place. Because it's hard to build a habit when you have trials and tribulations coming your way. You have all these assignments, you have all this stress of life. But when you have time, like in the summer, when you're off of school, when you're not going into work, that's the best time to build that consistency of getting in the gym, build that consistency of eating right, build that consistency of praying, getting in your word, spending alone time with God, finding time for God. And once you build those consistent habits before the trials and tribulations come, then you'll be ready to do those or continue to do those habits while you're in the trial and tribulation season. Because even in the trial and tribulation season, you need to still be reading your word, praying to God. But many times people fall away from God when they go through trials and tribulations. They start to lose their faith in God when they're going through trials and tribulations because they weren't prepared. And so they fall away from God for a little while until God disciplines them. God makes them go through even more trial and tribulation so they are broken and come back to God. But God doesn't want to punish you. He doesn't want you to have to go through things. But he must discipline his children because that's how he shows his love. By building us into the people that he wants us to become, and also building us to the people that we know is best for us. So yes, that's why you must discipline yourself so that God doesn't even have to discipline you. Discipline yourself in the season where you're not going through trials and tribulations so you don't have to get punished by God. Because the only reason we go through so much testing and trials and tribulations is because that's how God builds our character. Now, that actually brings me to the next one, which is to change your environment. And that I actually mentioned that in the first one, which is to distance yourself from everybody. You see, a lot of the times when we are in a good season, we're in a season of blessings, in a season of not going through too much. That's when we sometimes even forget about God. We get comfortable, so comfortable to the point we stop reading our word. We stop praying to God, even though that's the time where we should be preparing the most. And what that does, it causes us to slowly go back into the world without even noticing. And we start hanging around with friends we're not supposed to. We start going to parties and different stuff like that. And it's because we feel like we aren't in need of God anymore. And so that's why sometimes God may put tests. That's why God may even test you with a pop quiz, some random trial and tribulation come your way to get you to repent. Because if you end up falling into sin again, that should cause godly sorrow and cause you to repent and go back to God. But many of the times when we go through things, we tend to stop going as hard for God as we should. And that's exactly what even David did in the Bible. You see David, when he was a child, when he was young, he was on fire for God. So on fire for God that he didn't fear nobody. And he was a warrior, killing animals and going hand to hand with animals. God used him to even slay Goliath. For the most part, David's whole life, he was going through a lot of trials and tribulations, with the king trying to kill him, with him trying to slay Goliath, with him trying to run from the king and different stuff like that. And that's when he was most close to God. That's when he was praying to God. That's when he was brokenhearted. But then when he got to king, when God exalted him, when everything was good, he was in a season where everything was going good, praising God for a little while, but he got comfortable. And that's when he started falling back into the sin. So much into sin to where he slept with someone else's wife and then end up killing the man. He committed a big sin, and God had to discipline him. God had to chasten him. He had to take away the kid that he ended up producing because he ended up falling into sin. And God doesn't want that same thing to happen to us. He doesn't want us to have to fall into sin and then him having to chasten us. It actually saddens him when we fall into sin. So that's why it's important that even in the midst of a good season, even in the midst of things going your way, you must be the most on fire for God. And sometimes people think it's the opposite, but no, it's not the opposite. And the fourth way to prepare is to fast. You need to fast, build that spiritual strength, because fasting helps you practice self-control. It helps you be more focused in the word. And with all the distractions in this world, all the things that are trying to keep you away from God, fasting is the best way to stay close to God. You can not only fast from food, but also fast from social media. And that will get your mind off of things of this world so you won't fall back into the world, even in your good season. And I remember I was doing this because I was working in an environment that could have brought me away from God. I was in the environment where I was working at a job where they were playing like secular music and different stuff like that. People were cussing all the time, and it could have really influenced me to go back to the world. During that time, I was fasting. I was making sure during my break, I was spending time with God, and I wasn't just watching YouTube or just scrolling on TikTok. I made sure that I was getting spiritually fed while I was in an environment that could have caused me to go back to the world. And so that's what you must do in the season where you're preparing. You must fast. You must discipline your body so that you are ready for the season to come. It's kind of like the second tip where I told you to build good habits. Well, fasting will actually help you build good habits because it will help you have more self-control and more focus on God. And it's honestly a sacrifice of God. Sacrifice is anything that is discomforting, anything that is discomforting for the sake of God. So yes, sacrificing your phone, that may hurt you. That may hurt you for a little while, but you're doing it for the sake of God. And that's the sacrifice of God. God sees that. Sacrificing could even be staying away from lust, even though we are supposed to do that. That is a sacrifice from your flesh. And the more you do that, the more obedient you are to God, the more you start to love God more, the more he starts to give you that strength. And food is a big one because we do that every day. We feel our cravings. And so even if you fruit fast and stay away from your cravings for like a week, that is a sacrifice unto God. But the most important thing when you fast, there should be an intention behind it. You should have an intention on why you are fasting in the first place. Is it to get closer to God? Is it to focus more? Is it to get you away from lust? There should be an intention behind it. And when you are doing it, make sure that you pull through all the way, because fasting it gets hard. And halfway through the day, you may want to eat something. Or halfway through the day, you may want to scroll on your phone. But once you push through that, that's when you start to get closer to God. And that's when you start to build those good habits. And the last and final way to prepare for the spiritual battle, prepare for the testing that are coming, is to put on the full armor of God. It actually says this in Ephesians chapter 6. But the reason why I say it's important to put on the full armor of God, because it's just like I said in the beginning of the video, we are in a spiritual war. So if you go into war without any armor, you're more likely to lose that battle. So in order to make sure that you are equipped, in order to make sure that you are ready, you have to put on the full armor of God. And you can learn about the full armor of God in Ephesians 6. It's talking about the belt of truth. It's talking about living in righteousness, the breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of truth, the sword of the Spirit. And in order to be prepared, you must be in your word, because the sword of the Spirit, our weapon, is one of the most important things we must take into battle. So you must fill your mind with scriptures, fill your mind with the word, just fall in love with the word, fall in love with God. And once you start falling in love with God, that's when you really can put on the full armor of God and make sure that you are protected during the storm. So yes, in this walk with Christ, make sure that you are putting on the full armor of God, no matter what season you're in. No matter if you're in a season where you're going through storms, coming out of a storm, or even preparing for a storm and going into a storm. Make sure that you are putting on the full armor of God. And these are the 5 ways that you can actually prepare for the spiritual battle and the testing that God is going to put us through. But yes, make sure that you are applying these 5 things to your life. Make sure that you are actually taking action after this video, because we are always going to be going through tests, going to be going through storms. And the reason why we have to is because when we don't go through storms, like I said earlier in the video, we get comfortable, we get content, and we stop seeking God. And so we have to have a heart for God throughout this whole life, because if we don't, we're going to get cocky. We're going to get arrogant, thinking we can do it on our own. And so God must humble us with testings and trials and tribulations. So make sure that you are always preparing. Make sure that you are always in your word. Never get content, because the devil is always prowling around like a lion trying to catch you lacking. So appreciate all the support. Appreciate you for watching. Hope this video edifies you. But until next time, as usual, y'all stay blessed.